For those who don't know who we are, since maybe some of you know, a brief headline level summary. The UND Accelerator Lab is a network of social innovation labs distributed globally with a reach of 113 countries. The Accelerator Labs are integrated into UNDP country offices and serve as a platform for local engagement with ecosystems around innovation, civil society, academia, private sector, you name it. We received a few awards, just to mention, as novelty in how a large organization as UNDP is engaging in innovation and generally with a wider ecosystem in place. We create as a network value for the organization and for our partners and stakeholders with the intent of getting smarter together. So what we try to do is to bring people together with the help of data, with the help of technology, to create what we call collective intelligence, sort of incentivizing joint learning, mobilizing ecosystem, and generating evidence for quicker learning and development action. We do all of this from a bottom-up R&D perspective, and here the slide is a little bit convoluted, but more so just to let you know that at the heart of what we do lies also this idea of power from the collective and how we can focus on radical human centricity when we engage with our partners on the open R&D space. So this is academia, private sector, and others listed here on this slide. You might ask, okay, if this is the background, why circular economy? Why bottom-up R&D? And I'm assuming a lot of you know and are familiar with the wider frame about circular economy. But just to, headline level, circularity is in decline from around 9% to 7% in 2023. But it has a huge economic opportunity of $4.5 trillion if one would move from a linear economy to a circular. That means reusing and repurposing existing designs and generally building our economy in a way that it's less harmful and less resource wasting. From an Accelerator Lab network perspective, we, however, also scan in our network what sort of patterns are coming up. And with that background in mind of what circularity can do also from a development perspective, we understood that throughout the years, a number of labs have come up with innovation and experiments around waste and around circular system solutions without necessarily having a general directive to do so. So from an R&D perspective, from a global input perspective, we sort of started picking up on those patterns and building coalitions and insights around it. We call this an R&D agenda, which is part of the reason why we're here today, because it unified not just the distributed experiences, but also brought together around experiences and distribution of insights from around 50 country offices and accelerator labs across all 5 regions. So there were a number of insights jointly brought together to then discuss with partners and stakeholders around, okay, what distributed learning can we draw and what unified insights can we work with in the future. The outcome, or rather to translate those experiences into a unique offer, was generally this so-called R&D agenda. And at the end of the webinar, you have a small QR code that you scan in case you want to engage further. But we understood that, a lot of the commonalities that we saw across those 50 countries and across the partners that we worked with is that waste is an entry point into circular system. Waste can help you not just visualize and physicalize the problem in itself, but also use it as evidence to engage more deeply with a systemic challenge like circular economy. So we found 3 dimensions for action, dimensions for impact, namely weaving a collective, where we see, okay, when we bring actors together and create ecosystem, it creates ownership for circular solution and thereby helps the transition towards circularity. We focus on incentives as a mean to create impact. So what are the cultural practices? What are the economic practices that either hinder or enable circularity? And to the same extent, also, what can we learn from the grassroots, from the communities, from the innovators that are already working on enhancing circular systems and circular solutions in their small and or medium large environments, What can we do? What can we learn if we connect those with policy and create and drive systemic change? So across these three areas for impact and dimension for insight, we in a joint agenda setting kind of unpacked what it means to look deeply into weaving collectives, connecting grassroots to policies, but also what it means when we look at incentives. I'm not going to go much into the slide, but just as a headline level summary, we understood that when we have certain actions, which is mapping and understanding networks, developing frameworks, we can move into an opportunity space where some of the questions emerge that we would like to answer going forward. So a lot of the times the R&D agenda is more a collection of questions rather than a blueprint for program design. And it's an invitation for collaborative conversations and future and near future R&D. So some of the questions here is indigenous practices and how can those support circularity? How can we create opportunities for women and youth? But what new business models are shifting interest when we think about weaving collectives? The same goes for the different ones. I'm going to skip those here for the sake of time, but use this as an invitation to get back with us, back to us, and reach out, and we're happy to join you in this endeavor. So the first insight to put all of this into practice is coming out of Panama. Jennifer, this is your cue to join us on the conversation stage, because what we did today is also to use those three areas of impact, these three opportunity spaces, and try to translate them from theory to action. And Panama is a beautiful example to understand what it might look like when you try to weave collectives, but also connect grassroots with policies. So, Jennifer,
Hi
it's
there.
your
Yes,
it's
give me
the
1 second. Can you let me see let me go ahead and share.
And it's just a cup that says Kaluas, not the content.
Yes. Okay, so can you just confirm you're seeing my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Great. So give me 1 second. I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty. One moment. Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. As Mirko mentioned, I'm Jennifer Hodsko, and I'm head of exploration for UNDP Panama Accelerator Lab. So just as Mirko was mentioning, as putting into practice, I'm going to share a little bit about our experience in Panama and how grassroots innovation in our municipal markets is helping us rethink circularity, not just as a concept, but as what we're considering or what we're describing as community-powered transformation. And municipal markets for a lot of countries are at the heart of our cities and the work that we do in circularity. So this first picture, speaking of the heart of our cities, in the case of Panama at least, we want to set the scene a little bit. This is Cerro Patacon. It's Panama City's main landfill. And when you think about the heart of the city, this is not precisely what you want to be thinking about. But even so, I promise that this is one of the nicer pictures of the landfill. I mean, despite the lush landscape in the background, I think we can't be fooled by that, right? Because Panama is at a critical moment. I think when you look at landfills, they almost personify this pivotal moment in considering, what circularity, could be. But in our case, Cerro Patacón is overflowing. It's collapsing. It's a broken linear system, right? So we know that if we don't want the landfill to be the protagonist of our story, right? We don't want this to represent the heart of our city. That means that we have to think how we're producing, how we're consuming, and how we're also discarding, right? Our materials. So currently, each citizen in Panama, just to put things into context, generates about 1.2 kilograms of waste per day. If anyone in the chat or it's in the call wants to add, if they know what the kilo per waste per day in their respective country is, we'd love to know. We're one of the highest in the region, in Latin America. Recycling rates are also negligible. So much of the waste goes straight to the landfills, like the one that I just showed you. So nearly 6% of the population, around 200,000 people in Panama's case, faces food insecurity. Food loss and waste contribute to an estimated 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And over 70% of Panamanian adults suffer from diet-related diseases. And this is obviously caused by poor food environments, limited access to fresh and healthy options. So in other words, we're wasting food that could nourish people. We're emitting gases that heat the planet, and we're designing systems that make it harder, or rather, we're not designing systems, right? We're not making it easy for communities to thrive. So if we want to change the end of the story, right, we need to transform the beginning and the middle of that story. So the reason we want to talk about municipal markets is because they're at the intersection of those challenges and opportunities. So there are these, if you go to any market, right, they're sort of chaotic and they're vibrant. They can be informal, but they're also full of potential. They're these ecosystems that work, right? And in a way, they're these microcosms of our cities. So they reflect, what we eat, how we're interacting with people, what we throw away, what gets consumed. So let's start with some of the challenges, right? So first, they're epicenters of organic waste. So maybe if you're familiar with the topic, but if you're not, public markets are the third largest source of organic waste, for example, in Panama. And the third largest source of organic waste in the country. So approximately 50% of the waste that's generated in the markets is organic. So if we want to talk about opportunities, this presents a huge opportunity if we can capitalize on that, right? So markets are also essential to food access. They're essential to local economies and community life. They play a huge part, a potentially huge part of communities. But despite being major waste generators, they're rarely included in sustainability plans. So this is where we saw an opportunity. If we can build circular systems here at municipalities, why isn't there the possibility of doing it anywhere, right? So we began our journey where the linear system hits the ground. So we started the Zero Waste Initiative. Let me switch a slide. At the San Felipe Neri market, and that's the market that was shown in the previous slide, which is in downtown Panama City. And at the time we began this initiative, there was no sorting at the market. There was no composting. There was no recycling. There was no repurposing of food. There was this fragmented actor landscape in the market where there was little to no trust between, some of the market vendors, and the administrators. And also, interestingly enough, there was no general understanding of how much waste was being produced at the market. So if you have no understanding of what's being produced, I think it's safe to say that you have no understanding of the possibilities. If I throw out a number and say 50% of the waste generated is organic, I would think, wow, that's the 50% of material that potentially could be reduced, right, from being sent to a landfill. That's the way initially I think we were looking at it. So we said we found something powerful, right? The market was ready. They were open to try something new, but as most if you're implementing experimentation or a pilot, there's really not a blueprint, especially if something really hasn't been done before. So what we started doing was co-designing with people in the market. So we conducted waste audits and social mapping, waste characterization. You can see in the photo, waste characterization is basically taking all of the waste from that day, you separate it. There's different methods, the quartering method, you separate it into 4 piles, and you take a percentage of that and you count. You literally count, what type of waste it is, what percentage of certain vegetables you see. it's a really interesting process. We have a lot of experience with waste characterization, oddly enough, in the many years that we've been working with waste. But basically, we work together with market staff and vendors, and we uncovered some important initial findings from this process. And perhaps the most surprising, which is the figure on the right-hand side, right, was that 99% of the discarded organic waste wasn't really trash. It was food. And by that, I mean, sometimes if you go to a supermarket, right, or if you go to a municipal market, maybe you're looking for the best possible pineapple, right? You're looking for the absolute perfect pineapple. And you wouldn't buy something that was maybe a little bit too ripe, right? But that doesn't mean that if it's a little bit too ripe, that it's not edible. That's something that would be perfect for jam. Or if you think about bananas, right? If you're making banana bread, you don't want to use these, perfect bananas. You want to use bananas that are a little bit ripe, right? So that's the insight that triggered and dictated, the beginning of our research and development journey. So we installed low-tech composting stations. We worked with a local food rescue foundation to train workers and vendors. We created a food rescue protocol together with this foundation. It's called Rescate para Alimentos. We activated some public spaces in the market with pop-ups. We introduced digital tools to market vendors for tracking and transparency. And perhaps most importantly, we started working on a governance model for the market where everybody had a seat at the table, where everyone that wanted to participate had a voice. So some of the most memorable moments that could have come from this initiative was working with the Food Rescue Foundation, watching a pilot unfold, from carefully training each market vendor and building enough trust for them to hand over that unsold food, and then seeing it transformed on site into nutritious meals is incredibly powerful. I mean, in the photo on the left-hand side, I remember we started walking the market with these empty bins. And by the end of it, I mean, you see these bins are full of food. And that's just one bin, right? You have to do several rounds. But so there's something deeply impactful about seeing, this bin empty and then return overflowing, which with ingredients that would have otherwise gone to waste. So the beautiful thing, its circularity made very visible and personal. And the material being transformed on site means that the vendors get to see their stake in the process. So if something is being turned into jam, right, and then the vendor gets to taste that jam, right, it sort of brings the point home, and it encourages people to continue participating. We weren't the only ones that felt the potential, luckily. So we had a UN senior official that came to visit the project one day, and they took a bite of the food that we were preparing, and they asked, why isn't this happening at every market in Panama? So I think that was an aha moment for us, right? It confirmed what we had already suspected and we had thought about, but this wasn't just a pilot; it was a proof of concept that demanded this deeper testing and broader application. So we like to call the market our living lab. So it's a place that we've been able to test, learn, adapt, and now scale. We more than a project, it's a circular research and development agenda, right? But it's one that's grounded in community ownership and also driven by this governance model that I mentioned before, governance innovation. So thanks to this work and with support from the SDG fund, which is how we're now able to scale the project. We're expanding to other municipal markets across the country. Each site is different. So remember, I told you that there's not one blueprint that fits each municipal market. Some are rural, some are urban, but they're all being built on the scaling on the lessons that we've learned from the San Felipe Neri market. So the scope of the pilot is also growing. We're not only reducing food loss and organic waste, and increasing compost production, but we're also seeing this greater community participation in these sustainable practices, right? That hopefully are laying the groundwork for stronger governance and of course, all the way up to policy innovation that supports, circular transition in local markets. It's not only these, small scale pilots, but how can we turn this into policy that creates sustainability in the long term? So by prototyping what works, we're basically shaping public policy from the ground up. And this transformation, it's not only happening externally. Within UNDP, we're also testing more systemic ways of working, looking at how different programmatic areas connect in the country office. So, for example, how might our work in municipal markets link with integrated management of the Panama Canal watershed that's having huge problems with water. It's national dialogues. It's made international news. How can we build on grassroots solutions that have already been mapped in the country to inform not just market-based initiatives, but other projects that intersect with food systems? Waste intersects with food. Community resilience affects, intersects with food. Local economies intersects with food. We were, again, recently, before we put together this, or after this presentation was put together, Chiquita Banana, which represents a large part of, the economy in this specific region of Panama, had labor disputes, and Chiquita Banana pulled out operations. But entire communities depend on the production of these bananas. So, food all of a sudden becomes extremely important. So we're exploring how insights from one area can shape and strengthen others, and hopefully continuous feedback loops, right, to keep building our portfolio in the country office. So to visualize this somewhat in a diagram, what I was just speaking about, this systemic vision that we're working towards, a city where circularity is not just about waste, but it's about well-being, it's about resilience and this shared sense of purpose. So at the top, you can see that we begin with the shift in perspective, circularity as a pathway to community well-being, where people don't just consume, but they contribute. And this is the mindset, I think, that underpins everything. It aligns with UNDP's 3 transformational shifts, building resilience in the face of shocks, advancing circularity as a strategy for regeneration, and improving governance to ensure equity and participation. And these principles that I just mentioned are also reflected in national strategies. We have, the zero waste vision, the National Plastic Action Partnership. Maybe some countries are part of this global initiative, and we also have this market value chains and integrated management of the Panama Canal Basin. I touched on that just briefly momentarily ago. And at the foundation, I think, of all of this, right? None of this happens alone. Right. So the vision that we are building, that we're talking about, is being built through continued interventions. So this means that government institutions, communities, civil society, and the private sector, they have to work side by side. Right. It's about aligning grassroots action with policy direction to shape more resilient, inclusive, and regenerative urban systems. So that's our experience in Panama. Feel free to put any questions in the chat or reach out. I'll share my email in the chat. So back over to you, Mirko.
No, thank you, Jennifer. And thanks again also for the excellent presentation. I never get tired of listening to you and your experiment. I think what is really, really interesting is that you moved from one problem and pivoted to another once you've been presented with the fact that a lot of the waste was actually organic waste and how to repurpose those resources to create something of value. And I think that is, from a innovation perspective, a very interesting insight. However, we're also looking into, how we could harness potential bio waste in a general perspective through biotechnology. And this is where my colleague Igor from North Macedonia is coming in now to complement the insight and story, because Igor also has a very interesting take of, how to create economic value and incentive by engaging with a public policy sphere through, in this case, biotechnology. And from an agenda setting perspective, he's speaking to connecting grassroots to policies, but also focusing on incentives, just to earth this also already in the theoretical frame that we've started the conversation with. Igor, over to you and colleagues. Just for everybody on the call, Igor takes another 10 minutes, maybe 12, depending on how long he needs, and then we have Q&A. So please feel free to use the chat and engage. Sorry, Igor, over to you.
No worries. Thank you, Mirko. And I'm listening to the presentation of Jennifer for the second time, and I'm always surprised, and I love the experiment. I love the brilliance behind it. It's so simple, but it's so heartwarming. So thank you for taking my words for the previous presenter, Jennifer, who is a colleague with brilliant ideas. As Mirko mentioned, my name is Igor Izutov. I work as head of exploration, and maybe there's a small connection with the labs. Most of the things we have done with Jennifer, or you'll see a couple of things which are overlapping. We didn't know that we did them. We did them separately, So it's interesting how the network works. Similarly, North Macedonia faces this problem with biowaste. When I think about it, when I came to the acceleration lab, for me, a banana peel was just you throw it in the ground and it composts itself, creates all the nutrition for the soil. I never saw it as a waste. In our country, 45.6% of all waste is communal waste. Although I realized in working with the United Nations Development Program that it's a hazard in plain sight. As Jennifer mentioned, it's emitting greenhouse gases, and it's contributing to a wide range of environmental issues, which as humans we never think about. And in our country, actually, 95% of this bio-waste or this communal waste ends up in open landfills or dump sites, and causing these environmental issues. And the third and most striking part, which we found around 2021 when we did we had this kind of, I felt like a CIA agent. We transcripted around 700 pages of people conversations. We call this process deep listening when we're talking with a wide range of stakeholders, both in the educational, civil, and business sector. And we found out that the system is not seeing the potential of biowaste. It was sluggish. It didn't understand that there's innovation in reusing and repurposing biowaste. Or as we were saying at that time, it was a white space. Nobody was talking about biowaste. And we position it somehow in the middle of we call it a dynamic learning portfolio. What I mean about dynamic learning portfolio, this is kind of a map of all the experiments, small scale pilots we did around 4, I'll say, general topics. As Mirko maybe mentioned in the beginning, we as Acceleration Labs are always working on the edge of innovation through, let's say, 90-day circles. Some of them less longer, some of them less shorter, but they all have in common that they need to provide some kind of a value for the system. In our part, it was how can we generate green and well-paid jobs. So that's why we, around biowaste and biotechnologies, we positioned these four topics. So the data was needed for us to collect primary data. There's no primary data on biowaste. And proof of concepts. We have the governance part, the industry and talent, as mentioned, how to create a system where biowaste will be seen as a resource, and of course innovation, because at some point we had to generate and distribute this knowledge or R&D, research and development things we did in order to prove that biowaste is a resource. So I'm starting with the innovation slide, with the innovation point. As you can see, and I'm sorry, but I'm really bad at making PowerPoint presentations. So I'm just putting pictures, and I'll try to explain you all. In the middle right side, there is something called the waste valorization index, or that's a cascade system of waste valorization stating, and this is a pretty new concept. It was implemented, I think, in the worldwide science circles around 2016. So the situation in Macedonia, we had a waste valorization index for only one one product, which is paprika. Macedonia is known as an ivar country. Ivar is produced from paprika. There's a lot of leftovers. So we found one PhD biotechnician that did her PhD in University of Maribor, and part of her PhD was finding the waste valorization. And we were like, brilliant! This is we are on the go. We'll transform all the bio-waste that's left from the paprika production, and we can make briquettes, paletti, burning of paletti, it will hit the marginalized groups, etc., etc. However, the calorical value of paprika is really low. And then we continued, let's try to experiment with other waste valorization indexes. I think at the end we ended up with 30 waste valorization index for 51 products. Coming out of different bio-waste streams. We created the first bioplastic coming out of potato waste. I never knew that the leftovers potato waste are really valuable in order that you can create from the starch, you can create bioplastic. We also positioned we tried to change the narrative and position bio-waste as an art form. So we created the first bio-waste souvenir in the country. At the end of the day, bio-waste can be combined with other waste streams. For example, creating hempcrete out of hemp herd. When we go to the cascade system, I'm going back for the cascade system for all of you to understand. So at the beginning, so there's a company in Macedonia. I'll give you an example from a private sector. There's a company that's an egg farm. It's a huge egg farm, and from the eggshells they're creating electricity. If you think about it, it's brilliant. Circular economy one-on-one. However, if you start thinking as a biotechnician, bioeconomist, you understand that on the cascade system, that's on the fourth layer. So first, if they are smart, and we told them, please be smart, we gave you the R&D, use it. You extract dental things, something which is used in the dental industry. And this is being sold by milligrams. And these milligrams are valued more money than the electricity these milligrams produce. I hope you're getting the point. So this was our first, actually, this is 4 years of research and development, but at that point, we realized that this innovation, if it's produced either by startups, either by private sector companies, can bring incentives in circularity, creating circularity around bio-waste. The second presentation or second slide of the presentation is around data, primary data and proof of concept, because at the end of the day, you need to prove that something works, right? We started similar to Jennifer. Remember that they are doing the waste audits on the green market. We did a bio-waste audit on the whole city of Skopje. City of Skopje, by the way, the capital city of North Macedonia, around 1 million people circulate per day in the city. So we went to Horake sector. We asked them about 3 bio-waste streams: coffee, citrus, and tea leftovers, because these are the most, let's say, traditional bio-waste things which are happening in a thriving city, let's say. So what we found out we have an area called Devar Malo. Devar Malo is similar to Montmartre in Paris, where there is a huge concentration of coffee bars and juice bars, etc., etc. So in that area, helped us come to one equation that costed a lot of money and costed a lot of time. That 507 kilograms are produced bio-waste from citrus leftovers are produced per month in that area. If you transfer that in an industrial stage into essential oils, you get 3.7 kilograms essential oils. Why essential oils are important in this simple, let's say, transformation process is because as essential oils are traded on stock exchange. So you can see the prices. At that time, this equation is done around 2021. The price of essential oils was between, I'm not mistaken, around 40 something dollars. Adds value to the system. So it creates, with all the expenses, everything included, it creates value around 14.8 till $22 in the system. This depends on the stock exchange. Again, this was important for us to know that we are on the right track, the financial visibility of the transformed bio-waste, and also citrus is really every country has citrus at the end of the day. Another interesting point which we found was we did mapping of the whole European ecosystem, how Europe is solving, or how Europe's ecosystems are developing. So Horizon program, which is the R&D program of the European Commission, around 900 million euros were invested in this kind of biotechnology, bio-waste transformation startups. We found that there is a huge do-it-yourself biology movement around called biohacking. I can tell you more about biohacking, or I'll tell you a little bit more now, but if you have additional questions, I'll tell you more via email or one-on-one meetings. So we created the first blueprint of how a biohacking lab, or this was our vision, like let's create a lab where not only bio-waste will be produced, but also people will play with or experiment with bio-waste as an entry point, but with other waste streams, and create minimum viable products, or products that can be sold to the general market. And with the help of our living administrator, and together with UNICEF colleagues, we applied for one grant. I think in our case, it was a big grant. So we opened the first biohacking lab, which proved our kind of an experiment, or that we can create industry and talent. In the biohacking lab, which is a fully functioning biosafety level 2 lab, we did a couple of pilot programs just to prove a concept that something like this can work. So we started first with a program for startups working in biotechnologies. We were on purpose using the term biotechnologies because our faculty of technology our faculty is not called Faculty of Biotechnologies, which is a sexy name in my opinion. It's called Faculty of Technology and Metallurgy, which is kind of a boring Eastern European, old Yugoslavia name. The startup program produced one startup. Actually, they didn't win the program, but they were kind of a second startup. They created artificial skin out of kombucha. In Macedonia, a small country like ours, they went to do brilliant things. They opened their own companies, 3 students two from the biotechnology faculty, 1 from the mechanical faculty. They got VC funding of, I think, 90K or even more now, opened their own company. They're traveling the world, going to VC funds. I think they're producing right now leather things from kombucha. It's actually the leftovers from kombucha. Kombucha is kind of a drink. People in my country, some of them like it, some of them don't. But still, from that, they produced artificial skin and artificial leather. Then we continued with the private sector, because that was one of our second proof of concept that we had to work. Can the private sector change? I think on time, Mirko, right? Can the private sector start change or make a shift in their thinking around bio-waste, especially pharmaceutical companies? So, for example, we created the first biotech academy for the private sector. It was piloted last year in September. We had 13 companies who were chosen out of I don't know what was the end number, but many companies applied. We had pharmaceuticals, we had either tobacco industries, who started seeing that the bio-waste they are creating from their working can be transformed. And I think that the program was pretty ingenious, because we also touched upon this microbiology part, which I really like. For example, for the first time in the country, we brought from the University of Antwerp purple bacteria. It's called purple. I forgot the name of the bacteria. It has a code name. It feeds with apples. So when the professors from University of Thessaloniki and University in Venice came to the biohacking lab to present it to the private sector, they were telling me, like, bring me apples. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. They were saying, like, no, the bacteria is fed by apples. So if we don't want the bacteria to die overnight, we need to feed her with apples, which were, for me, was like, wow, that's where the whole thing is going on. And then it was the democratization of science. Together with UNICEF, we created curricula for primary and secondary school students. I think around 2,000 students went to the biohacking lab, where they found out that the transformation of bio-waste, or banana peels, apple peels, bio-waste is not so difficult. They can easily transform it and get get, as we call them, like minimum viable products or products for another industry. That's for the Open Biohacking Lab. If you have any further question, please let me go. So here I used Mirko's presentation slides because I'm a lazy person by birth. Just change the colors. So divided them in two kind of two points, which I and my team and everybody that worked around this portfolio in the previous 4 years. So what are the R&D opportunities and what were the learning opportunities? So the R&D opportunities was that somehow throughout all these small scale experiments of this portfolio, we proved that incentives encourage the adoption of circular principles and practices like the biohacking lab, the whole all these programs, etc. From the other side, we proved somehow that new value creation can happen. We have these MVP products. We have the bio-waste souvenir that can be easily replicated by other cities, and there can be a new narrative around the biotechnologies and this whole STEM kind of way of thinking. Of course, leveraging circularity, because at the end of the day, I think it was the Administrator Achim Steiner on one of, we never lobbied for the biohacking lab to be in his speech, but on the World Biohacking Biotech Forum in Belgrade, in 2023, he mentioned the biohacking lab as an example for a bottoms-up approach towards circularity and towards a system change. Of course, anchoring somehow, if we are anchoring socialization of the R&D agenda on circularity through these kind of portfolios can mobilize the private sector. And at the end of the day, the opportunities with governance, because at the end of the day, the governance needs to stimulate the business opportunities even more. And again, learning opportunities, the biotech is the skill of the future. If you see all the McKinsey's and the Deloitte's articles, they're saying that VC financing is down in tech startups, not AI startups, the tech startups. However, in biotech startups, they're going up. The bio-waste can be a resource for the private sector. It's interesting, and this is something we touched upon only last year, by the end of the year, that construction and demolition waste and bio-waste or bio-waste can be combined with other waste streams, for example, in the construction waste, in creating, as I mentioned, one example, the hemp concrete, so you can build houses out of 2 bio-waste streams. And at the end of the day, I think Jennifer is even better example, but bio-waste into food. However, more experimentation needs to be done if people are willing to eat food that's created out of bio-waste, or at least that was our kind of a learning question. And that's it from my side. Yes, thank you.
No, thank you, Igor. I mean, a lot of content in a very compressed time. So thank you also for managing to at least get your insights across. But I think from a side note, I really would like to measure your words per minute, because the synapses were firing, I could tell. So everybody, there is now time for Q&A. We have around 10 minutes left, so you are free to join us either in plenary or in the chat. I see there's one question from Alberto. I'm not sure, Alberto, if you want to come in to maybe just speak out your question so colleagues can react. Otherwise, obviously, other colleagues are also invited to do so. But maybe, Alberto, do you mind breaking the ice?
Happy to, Mirko, and hello, colleagues. Great presentations as always. So I have this question. Technically, recycling is not always that difficult, but it is difficult economically. And a big variable that influences its profitability is to have large quantities of homogeneous waste. So it makes sense that Jennifer would start in a food market to think about recycling of food waste, because there's a lot of it, and almost all the waste that is in the food market is going to be food waste. That said, the experience of circular economy practitioners is when you move from prototype to scale, you are struggling with this kind of thing. So some activities would be very well sustainable, but they need like a big inflow of homogeneous, high quality materials. Urban waste recycling has been struggling with this since I remember. Obviously things are different in different contexts. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about this, specifically your thoughts in the context of the countries that you operate in rather than in general.
So, Alberto, when you say your thoughts on the context, what, like regarding the difficulty or the challenges or the sustainability?
That plus maybe even the opportunities for it is not a coincidence that electronic waste recycling is more advanced in Africa, because there's a huge informal economy and they have developed a sort of comparative advantage on this.
Yeah.
So what I don't imagine, so in Europe, urban waste recycling doesn't work. Financially is very difficult to make it work. But I'm hoping that your approaches have seen ways around that.
Yeah, so I would say just a couple of things like in our experience. I think there are definitely informal economies around certain recyclable items, right? So for example, aluminum, right? There's these informal economies around, collecting aluminum or different metals, right? And they even become part of culture, like pop culture, where they integrate the sounds of the informal, like the trucks that circle the neighborhoods asking people for, their old washing machines or, electronics, or, they've integrated them into like songs and advertisements. It's really funny, right? So there's definitely these informal economies, but I would say that, the biggest culprits, right? So if we're looking at like plastics, for example, or if we're looking for organics, there are fewer incentives, right? So those are, while there are entrepreneurs that are occupying those spaces, I would say there's less of an economy around them at the moment, right? So I think it's sort of building a case. I mean, I would say that we had a recycling, a pilot project in a rural municipality, in partnership with, a private sector actor to recycle plastic. And one of the initial challenges was, well, how much am I going to get for this? What do I get in return? Right. So there was the initial, like the incentive. Well, if I'm giving you my plastic, I should get something in return. And then you have to look at the value of plastic, and that's where education comes in. It's like, well, okay, what is the value of this, or how are you affected if this is thrown into a river, or for example, microplastics? I mean, it's looking at, you try to look at the bigger picture, and there the incentive isn't monetarily, or there's not an economic incentive, but it's like, okay, the incentive then becomes my health, right? The planet, these bigger picture items. So it's a hard question, because I think that in Panama's case, I would say it really depends on the material, right? And I think the obvious answer is where there's greater incentives, there's more activity. So I'm not sure, Igor, if you have anything to add.
All good. No, it's similar. I think the situation is basically similar in both countries. With an addition, maybe an interesting experiment we did. We created the blueprint and feasibility study to prove that, inspired by I don't know if people know about Vienna token. Alberto, maybe you know about Vienna token. So basically, the city of Vienna implemented a token on your application. Is based on a blockchain. Stating if you are using public transportation or walking or cycling, you're receiving points. With that points, you get discounts or even free tickets for the cinema, etc., etc. Inspired by that example, we created a kind of a bio-waste token or a blueprint. We never piloted it, and we proved via feasibility study that this kind of incentive, if, for example, if you are a coffee how it's called, a barman, or you work in a coffee shop, and you are incentivized by the city for less taxation or by free tickets, that the coffee waste overs you will put in a special bag, give it to some company that will create. I think we have a list of 20 products that you can create out of coffee waste, for example. It's including mosquito repellents. This can be interesting for Africa, etc., etc. So when it comes to incentivizing, of course, things needs to happen. However, in my opinion, it depends on how much is the cities, or how much are the cities prepared to create this kind of a systematic change. Yeah, Alberto,
Alberto,
that's the
if I could
culture
just-
talk.
Yeah, if I could just jump back in before we respond, Alberto. So sorry, I just saw your question in the chat. So I think I basically, to your point, right? I mentioned that there's these economies around aluminum and metals, but I think in the problem of our country, just going back to food, and then the next question, right? What types of incentives were given for organic waste? So when we built these food rescue, like when we partnered with the Food Rescue Foundation to actually do the rescuing and the production of food in the market, the like the vendors, when they give us their old organic waste, they would get a punch card, right? And then you would punch a circular dot out of that card. And then when they have that card filled up, they're entitled to a meal that is being produced by the Food Rescue Foundation, because the products, right? So the food that's actually produced by the foundation, it's distributed to local food halls, right? That they work with. So basically, for, like orphanages, or for, food halls for homeless people. So that's where the production goes to. But for example, for buy-in with the food vendors, they would get their punch card, right? And also, if there were leftovers from what was being produced, the vendors would have access to that food in the market. And then other opportunities, Alberto, for example, we realized that the market is on sort of the main tourist route. So, working with, the Ministry of Tourism and tour operators to do a food tour, for example, of the municipal market, and the products that are being produced, like the jams and the jellies, they have, we've branded them as the products from, Mercado San Felipe Neri, the Zero Waste Food Initiative. Tourists, like those, always like those food items, they like a story. So it's like, how can you build also storytelling into the work that you're doing, and invite people to come and join you as part of that story. So I think we have a lot of ideas and new ones that are also being tested. Again, it's a living playground for for circularity.
No, thank you, Jennifer. We are at the hour, so I need to force us to come to an end with the conversation. But I think a few interesting points were also raised in the chat, but also came across in the conversation. So maybe there is some form of follow-up, either via mail or via chat, and to this call. But I think interestingly also thinking about food waste and food processing, given that organic waste needs quicker processing time. So a lot of the questions also about infrastructure, how much were you able to transform waste into something useful before it goes beyond the point of recovery, but also then related to, at least let's say in larger economies like here in the US or in Europe, a lot of the ideas about food processing and food waste rescue then comes in and play with health regulations and prohibited environments that deny you actually making use of those instead of leftover and food waste as a resource, at least. That's it on a general note. I want to thank everybody for joining us in this call. If you found it interesting, there is an opportunity, please, to get in touch through our R&D agenda. You are able to scan the QR code, read what we've been up to, get some of the questions, get in touch with us either via me with the email mentioned and or following this call. Have a lovely day. Thank you to the speakers again, and I wish you all a blessed morning, afternoon, night, depending when you come in and zooming in from. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.